Welcome to this Adobe Photoshop training session. In this particular session we're going to be looking at adjusting flesh tones using particular CMYK values and the excellent selective color command. Now here's a picture of my daughter and I, which was taken at a fun run event in central London last year. You can see that the flesh tones of my daughter are relatively light. There's quite a lot of strong light on the image, and at the same time here I'm looking a little bit on the red side. So what I'm planning to do is to warm up our skin to give us a decent flesh tone. Now first of all, what makes a good flesh tone colour? I'm just going to flip into Safari. I've done a Google search and I've just searched on CMYK flesh tones, and loads of results have come up, but one that I go to more often than not is this particular web address here. And if we just scroll down a little bit, there's a really good 3 little pictures here which gives you a slightly oriental type of skin, a more sort of neutral skin, and then a lighter sort of English rose type of skin. And underneath it gives you some projected CMYK values. Now I'm going to choose these values, the 19 cyan, 33 magenta and 50 yellow values. So flipping back to Photoshop, I've clicked onto the color selector on the left hand side and I've just typed in those values, and this is just giving me a little color guideline to work to. Now, in the best tradition of preparing things earlier, if I go to my channels, I've already made a channel selection of both my daughter's flesh as well as mine. So I'm going to hold down the Apple key and click this selection that I've already saved, and which is a quick way of reloading it as a selection. I'm going to go to the Select menu and then choose this new Refine Edges command. And through here, I can now feather this selection, so I can see that I'm going to get a soft edge change to what I'm doing. Now the next thing I want to do is to take some colour samples, so this is where I'm going to use my info palette over here. And if we click onto the little eyedropper tool, we can select what's called the colour sampler tool. And this allows me to then select a few areas and to see them in the info palette. So I'm going to make a selection there. I'm trying to choose different areas where the skin's maybe a bit more in shadow and highlight and mid-tone, and maybe a little bit more coloured. So I'm going to also take another selection there. Now over here on our info palette you can see it's giving me RGB values, but I'm planning to correct via CMYK because this is going to be a printing job, plus I actually find CMYK easier to work with. So if I click onto the little eyedropper here, I can change that selection point to sampling by CMYK. So I can see that sample number 1 is giving me those fixed colour values at the moment, and sample number 2 is giving me those colour values. Just a quick recap, the projected values I'm looking at, obviously this is only the perfect value and will only appear somewhere across the whole picture because of the light and the shadow that appears. So it's 193350. Now I'm going to go Image menu, Adjustments and then Selective Color. And this is one of my favourite colour correction facilities in Photoshop because it allows me to correct by CMYK. And how this one works, it's only going to work in my masked area of course, is first of all we have to choose the colour from this pop-up list in the image that we're trying to change. Now if I position my cursor over my daughter's flesh tone here, looking at the CMYK values in this column here, I can see that it's made up with a larger percentage of magenta and yellow. There's also some cyan at the same time and no black. So larger percentages of magenta and yellow, which are the 2 predominant colours, equals red in Photoshop's view. If there was more yellow than magenta, then it would deem it to be orange, and if it was cyan and yellow, then it would be green. So I know that as Photoshop deems this to be a red, as there's more magenta and yellow together, I need to choose reds from this list. Now, looking at my fixed samples now, is I can see what values are in these areas. Looking for is 193350. So if I now go back to Image menu, Adjustments and Selective Color, what I need to do, looking at my samples, I need to probably up the amount of cyan just a little bit realistically. Magenta is probably about okay, but then the next thing to do is to introduce a lot more yellow because there's already quite a lot of magenta there. So upping that, and you can see the sample on the right hand side is already roughly at our required value, but the sample on the left is a little bit low, but again it's different on different parts of the face according to the available light in the image really. So I'm quite happy with that. That's warmed me up nicely. So I'm going to click OK, Apple D or Control D on Windows to cancel that selection, and then hold down the Alt key, and then I can just click to cut out those little colour samples. So I'm going to now add a little more magenta. So again, in sample point number 1, we've now achieved 31% magenta and 39% in sample point number 2. Just to refresh my memory, if I just flip back to Safari, then we need to get as high as about 50% yellow. So at this stage I can see there's quite a low percentage of yellow there, only 17, 34 there. So I can start to increase the amount of yellow heading on towards about that 50% value. Obviously you will have differences across the whole of the face, but you can see now already as I've upped those values the quite significant change that there's been to these tones already. Now if I then click OK, if I just do an Apple Z on the keyboard and do another Apple Z, is of course this will just show you before and afters, which I'm a great fan of in Photoshop. So you can see that there's the original skin tones and there's the much warmer skin tones. So I can then do Apple D to cancel that particular one there. Now to remove one of these sample points, if you hold down the Alt key and you go over the top of one of them, you can then get a little pair of scissors and then you can just click to remove these sample points. Easy as that. I'm going to move on to doing my face over here. So I'm going to, on my channels, I'm going to Apple click the man channel, which brings up my selection, and then go to the select menu and refine edges, and I'm just going to feather those edges so I've got a nice soft edge. It's remembered the last settings that I've applied. This is just going to soft edge in the effect, so it's not going to give a harsh join in any way. Again, I'm going to set some sample points for my little colour sampler, so I'm going to choose the tip of my cheek there, and then I'm also going to choose just on my chin there at the same time. Again, it defaults back to RGB, but I'm just going to change it to CMYK, and again change it to CMYK. Now I can see my colour values here in my two sample locations. So again, if we just refresh our memory, the colour we're looking for is 193350. So if I now go back to Image Menu Adjustments and Selective Colour, what I need to do, looking at my samples, I need to probably up the amount of cyan just a little bit realistically. Magenta is probably about okay, but then the next thing to do is to introduce a lot more yellow because there's already quite a lot of magenta there. So upping that, and you can see the sample on the right hand side is already roughly at our required value, but the sample on the left is a little bit low, but again it's different on different parts of the face according to the available light in the image really. So I'm quite happy with that. That's warmed me up nicely. So I'm going to click OK, Apple D or Control D on Windows to cancel that selection, and then hold down the Alt key, and then I can just click to cut out those little colour samples. Lastly, just to compare my original with my changed version, which I always like to do when I finish something, I'm going to go to my history and I'm going to add a new snapshot. And if I then double click the title here, I can call this My Last Version as an example. So you'll see that I can then go back to the original opening state of the image, and you'll see the much lighter skin, again much more red in the skin here, and then I can switch on to this one and I can see the much warmer skin. So colour correcting via CMYK values, using the little dropper points and the info palette and changing that from RGB to CMYK, and then using image menu adjustments and selective colour. A really good way to correct, and don't forget to look up the actual flesh tones from a website. Very, very useful.